In this video, we'll talk about how to set up a truth table. So the basics of a truth table is you usually have a formula or set of formulas that you want to create a truth table for. So let's take some formula that we want to evaluate. So let's have our formula not P and S, and then let's add one more part to it. Let's make it or P. So here's our formula right there. So step one you can take to be just write down the formula. Step two is to identify the number of distinct propositional letters that are found in the formula. In other words, we look to see, and at this formula we see there's a P and then there's an S and then there's a P, but there's only two distinct propositional letters. There's P and S. So step two is to identify the number and then to write that off to the left. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's write P over here and we'll write S. The next step is to identify the number of rows that we'll need in our table. So we're going to need a certain number of rows that go under P and S in the formula. And so we need a way of determining that. The way we determine that is we just take the number of distinct propositional letters, which in our case is 2, and plug that into n for the following formula, 2 to the n. So if we only had one letter, we would need 2 rows, because 2 to the 1 would be 2. In our case, we have 2 to the 2, where n is equal to 2, and so we're going to need 4 rows. If we had 3 propositional letters, let's say we had P, S, and R, then we would have 2 to the 3, and so we would need 8, and so forth. So whatever number of propositional letters you have, you'll input that number into n, and that will tell you how many rows you need. So in our case, remember, we're going to need 4 rows here. Now, step 4, which is the final step in setting up the table, is to write a bunch of T's and F's in those rows. And so what those T's and F's stand for are distinct ways we can assign the value of true or false to those propositional letters. And all 4 rows together will represent all of the different or distinct ways we can assign truth values to P and S. These are known as interpretations. An interpretation is an assignment of a truth value, T and F, or F, but not both, but not neither, to P and S. So we need to fill out all of the ways of assigning truth values to P and S in this row. Now there's a couple different ways you can do this. One way could be just to try to randomly write them out, but we're going to take a systematic approach. So here's our system. Whatever number of rows we have, let's say it's 4, we will take half of that. So this would be 4 over 2. So we're taking half, which is 2. And so this tells us the number of trues we will have in our first column, followed by the number of falses we will have. So we'll have 2. So 2 trues and 2 falses. So let's put that in under P right here. So this will be true and true. And then we'll have false and false. The next step is to take half of this number and half of this number. So if we had 2 trues, we would have 1 true, because half of 2 would be 1. And if we had 2 falses, half of 2 would be 1. And then we'll repeat this pattern for the rest of the table. So let's take a look at that up here. So we'd have true, 1 true, followed by 1 false. Then we're going to repeat the pattern, 1 true, followed by 1 false. And in doing this, we ensure that every way of assigning true and false to the propositional letters is covered. There's not another way of assigning the values of true and false to this P and S, because you see that, well, they could both be true. One could be true, the other could be false. One could be false, the other could be true, or they both could be false. There's no 5th value, and we didn't duplicate or leave any out. Now, in the case that we looked at, we had 2 letters, and that told us that we're going to need 4 rows. But let's say we had 3 distinct propositional letters, and so in this case, what we would need is 8 rows. Well, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take 8 over 2, and 8 over 2 would give us 4 trues and 4 falses. So our first column here for our first letter would be 4 trues and 4 falses. For the next one, we would take 2 trues, which is half of 4, and then 2 falses. And then we would repeat that pattern. So this would be our second column. And so we're going to need one more column for that third letter. And so we would take half of 2. So half of 2 is 1. We would say 1 true and 1 false. And so we would repeat this pattern for our third column. So you can see for each column, we're simply just taking half of the previous column and then we are repeating that pattern. So as an exercise for you to try to set up the truth table for the following formula. This is P, right arrow, Q, or S. Pause the video, take a moment, and try it for yourself. Okay, now that you're back, what you would want is in this first column, as we mentioned, it would be 4 trues followed by 4 falses. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then we would have 2 trues followed by 2 falses. And then we would repeat that pattern. So we'd have true and true, false and false. And then for our third column, we would just alternate true, false, true, false, true, false, all the way down the line. We're just repeating this pattern of 1 true and 1 false. And this would give us 8 columns. And these 8 columns each one would represent an interpretation, a way of assigning truth values to propositional letters. And all 8 collectively would represent every way that true and false can be assigned to these propositional letters. So that's how you set up a truth table.